Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I want to reflect quickly, although it's not going to be that quick, on the two events largely linked to the Home Office, but equally applicable to our government at large, and put to you all really an appeal to appreciate the gravity of the situation as Britain accelerates towards a totalitarian state and what absolutely needs to happen next. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So actually this is going to be quite heavy for a Friday. The two events that have really hit me personally very hard have been the tragedy of tens of lost souls in the Channel, thanks to our government's callous disregard for both human decency and international law. I could easily have dedicated a whole video to that event, and would have done had I not already discussed the same issue several days before that boat capsized. There are other things I could add, but mostly I'd be repeating myself, and tragedies like this are rare on this scale, but they are an inevitable consequence of our government's attitude. It won't stop until the government does. And it's not the public attitude. I remind you when Priti Patel threatens to make it illegal to rescue someone in peril out at sea, the RNLI lifeboat charity received record donations. Yes, you will hear the loud mouths good and clear, giving the impression that people in Britain, or maybe just England, don't care about these people. That's not true. The heartless minority are just very loud, that's all. Bear in mind that it is believed that between about 0.5 and 1% of the male population of Britain could be classed as psychopaths. That's a small minority. I bet it's not as small as many people think. That's 1 in 200, maybe 1 in 100 people are psychopaths, or males at any rate. And if they shout loudly enough, they can easily make themselves seem more numerous, like a cat making itself big. But the second event was the news sneaked out that Priti Patel has made the policing bill even worse than we thought it already was. It had already been sent to the House of Lords as a bill that would ban protests, actually make it unlawful to hold a protest. In reality, that doesn't mean you would never see protests in this country, because it wouldn't be consistently applied. We've already seen over the summer how the Metropolitan Police in London have policed different protests. They've cracked down very hard on peaceful vigils and protests against right-wing policies, but have allowed pro-right-wing protests to proceed unchallenged. This is the future. But the government don't just want a corrupt Met police force to enforce it. They want to have the legal clout to also make sure the courts won't interfere. The iNews, which I'll link below so you can read the thing for yourself, reported that Patel waited for the very last moment, was in the Lords, and then threw in a raft of amendments to her own bill, which gave no time at all for people to call it out before it was all passed. You usually expect the House of Lords to moderate ill-advised legislation, but Patel has used them to make it more extreme. The new bill means that a police officer can stop and search you without having reasonable grounds to suspect you of any wrongdoing. Once this is written into law, and it's now imminent, they'll just be able to do that, just walk up to you, empty your pockets out. I don't want to, I don't care. On what grounds? I just have a gut feeling about you. When we recently had the tragedy of a police officer abusing their power to rape and murder a woman, this bill gives any police officer the power to just walk up to someone, demand they turn their pockets out. There'll be no complaints about the officer having no just cause later on either, because they won't need to have. They just claim they had a gut feeling and that'll be that. Now with the Sarah Everard, murdered lady, Tory MPs lined up to say, well, she just shouldn't have got into the car. She, if she had a gut feeling, something wasn't right, she just not have got into the car. Who's going to disobey a police officer? But here's the thing. This law now means that if anyone actually followed the advice of those MPs and refused to cooperate with the police officer because they didn't feel it was right, they'd be in prison for almost a year. Up to 51 weeks in prison you'll get for that. Just refusing. Just saying to a police officer, you haven't got just grounds, I'm not going to do that. The bill now has expanded on the specific types of protests that will land you in trouble. Basically, even a single person standing in the street with a placard decrying the government would be breaking the law if the government decide that you're breaking the law and tell the police to arrest you. The government have already taken away our freedom of movement with Brexit. They are taking away our freedom of protest with this bill. It's basically a done deal now, unless, ironically, there were a protest of such massive scale that it convinced enough Tory MPs that their seat would be forfeit if they allow it through at the final stage. But no such protest will occur. Hardly anyone even knows about it. Now, I don't know how this bill will interact with the Human Rights Act. I'm not a legal expert, but I do know that the government are committed to abolishing the Human Rights Act, so it'll be a moot point soon anyway. And at that point, our freedom to do anything that the government do not approve of will rapidly be removed. But human rights are also international law, some may say. So is the Refugee Convention that we signed up to. How's that going? The government will ignore international law. We know that. They do that. That's what dictatorships do. Before I make the appeal that I'm building up to, I want to explain how my political priorities have changed in a very, very short time. If I go right back to 1992, I was politically aware throughout the 80s. I was very interested in politics from a very young age. In 1992, though, that was the first general election where I was really quite certain I wanted Labour to win. I was genuinely crushed when they didn't. I wasn't old enough to vote. I was only 16. The next election, Labour won. I took it for granted to a certain extent. I was glad that Labour were in power and I saw the improvements immediately. As someone who just started a teaching career, I saw the improvements immediately, the real good done by the government. But I also wanted better in a number of areas. At the time, if I was doing a YouTube channel, YouTube didn't even exist then, but if I were, I'd have been quite critical of the government, actually. Basically what we had was better than the Conservatives by a country mile, but I was still not satisfied. Should be more. In 2010, the Conservatives came back in and ushered in austerity. The dark days of Thatcher's 1980s was back. 2015 was the last time I've gone into a general election just hoping for a Labour government. So I want to consider from 1992 all the way up to 2015, my attitude to politics was very similar. Each general election, I want Labour to win. I want a Labour government. That was it. And for me, it was Labour government or Conservative government. 2015 was the last time that was the case. Politics was still normal then. I'd lessened my criticisms of Blair. His time in power still wasn't good enough, but 5 years of Tory rule as a teacher, as an adult, showed me the positive difference that Labour government made, and maybe I hadn't appreciated it enough. It had been lost by then. In 2017, Brexit was happening. Now, I had not seriously imagined that it would in 2015. I knew the referendum was going to be coming, but not the result. In 2017, I suddenly didn't care that much about a Labour government as such. I'm a member of the Labour Party. Obviously, I want a Labour government, but in terms of order of priority, not the top priority. I just wanted the Conservatives out of power. That then became the priority for me. That became more important. A Labour coalition or alliance with other parties would suit me just fine. It wasn't far off either. The number of votes needed to have swung just a few more seats, that was always needed. A few more seats to stop even the DUP rescuing the Tories was not that much. Brexit was there to be stopped. In fact, lots of people tried. Labour got a massive haul of votes. It was actually unprecedented, as non-Labour voters actually did switch to vote tactically against the Tory Brexit that was on the cards. It just wasn't quite enough in quite the right areas. So we lost that too. Brexit was now the number one political issue for me. This channel is largely regarded as a Brexit channel because I started at a time when Brexit was the number one issue. There's also absolutely loads of material to talk about because it's very new, very strange, very weird. It's still the most serious political topic for me. But in 2019, another dimension was added. That general election was the last chance to stop Brexit. It had also caused a lot of damage, much more than it had in 2017. But in 2019, something else happened. I did a video on the infamous page 48, I think it was, of the Tory manifesto. The Conservatives were promising to do the opposite of conserve anything. They were going to rip us out the EU in almost the hardest way imaginable. They were then going to abolish all democratic institutions not directly controlled by the government. Those that remained would not be able to act as a check against executive power. They are working through this checklist. And the thing is, whenever I look at what they've done, because instead of dealing with the pandemic or dealing with Brexit, they are laser focused. It's not that they're not doing anything. They are laser focused on removing these democratic institutions. Whenever I look at what they've done, because they've already ticked some off, It's always worse than what was promised in the manifesto. You read the manifesto, you go, oh, that's bad. You look at what they've done, it's even worse. The Brexit they've delivered, even worse than the one they wrote about in the manifesto. The policing bill, worse. They've promised to politicise our currently independent judiciary. Now, if they crack on with that, I'm thinking that's going to be even worse than what they promised as well. I am thinking that come the next general election, Brexit may not be the most important issue. It's not that it'll have diminished in importance. In fact, the importance will be even greater. The further we go down this hard Brexit divergence route, the more important Brexit becomes. I just mean relatively. Brexit may actually pale into relative insignificance compared to our descent into a fascist police state. And this is no longer a warning. It's happening. It's happening now. When I started this channel, I was single. Very happily not at all single now. But I said to my partner a few months ago, if I'd not met her, if I was still single, because my job now, because I do this full time, it doesn't tie me to a particular place, I could do this anywhere. I would have been seriously thinking about moving to either Wales or Scotland. The reason is that there is some bulwark against the damage the Conservatives are doing there, thanks to devolution. Last night, I was wide awake for hours, thinking that, again, if I was still single, I don't think I'd be thinking about moving to Scotland or Wales now. I think I'd be trying to move to Ireland. Actually out of the UK altogether if I could. Not as easy now since Brexit. For the first time, I really do think there's a credible chance that we will be the next European fascist state after Spain, Italy and Germany in living memory. You know, nobody will do anything to stop it. They didn't with those countries. Like the Second World War only happened because the Nazis invaded other people. Even then they were allowed to invade some. They just took the piss with Poland. Nobody stops you persecuting your own people. I had visions of there being a tipping point. Because it's slowly at the moment, you know, frog in the boiling water. There'll be some tipping point at some point where the government have pushed enough levers to not even pretend anymore, to just suspend democracy and become an actual dictatorship. You know, of me being arrested for political dissent and imprisoned. Or of getting some prescience about the situation and fleeing my own country, become a refugee myself. I'm thinking in my head, am I being ridiculous? What's to stop this? I can't think of anything to stop it. So here's my appeal. I'm going to be talking more about what needs to happen at the next election from a general point of view. On Sunday I've got another video discussing that. But I think we really need to do everything we can to persuade every single person to vote tactically at the next election and not allow any bullshit excuses. There's like too many people who will not vote for the main anti-Tory candidate because that party, usually Labour, doesn't have quite the right policy for you. Well, I would vote for them, but I can't agree with this stance or that stance. The numbers are going to be really tight. So tight that every person matters. They were really tight in 2017 and 2019. It was really so close going the other way. Just a really small number of votes in the right place would have finished Brexit before it even started in 2017. And it was also a small number of votes in key areas that swung it for Johnson in 2019. The same will happen next time. It won't be a landslide win in terms of the popular vote. It will be very tight. It'll only be a matter of do we give them the power to carry on and act as if they've got 100% of the vote. People need to understand the stakes. No matter how weak you might think that Labour or the Lib Dems or whoever is on a particular issue, consider that the Conservatives would be much worse on all of them. But more importantly, if the Conservatives win the next general election, and I don't know what further damage they'll have done before that general election, if they win the next general election, it could actually be the last election we ever have in this country until either a coup, a revolution or a war has wrested control back. And who the bloody hell wants that? You know, our greatest enemy right now is not the Conservatives. It's the notion, it's this belief in people who can stop them, that the future I described couldn't happen. Therefore, they're free to say, well, I'm not going to vote Labour because I don't like their Brexit stance or their stance on this or their stance on that, or I don't like Starmer, I don't know who he is, blah, 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 blah. Of course it can happen here. It happened in Spain, Italy and Germany in living memory. It's happening in Poland, Hungary, Russia and Belarus right now. What the bloody hell is special about us, even though we're ticking off all the same events on the path to those same outcomes, that means it won't happen here? Of Of course it will happen here if we don't do something to stop it. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.